Good boys.
I'm Mark.
Bog beef. Today we're joined by Tinkzorg. What's left?
Yes, the extremely problematic fascist from Sweden and all of that crazy jazz.
How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm sort of sitting back laughing because there's been this sort of creation in parts of American Barney world of a legend about about my sort of degeneracy and all of that stuff. So I actually got the notification from some random person on Twitter that I had been fired from my job for being a weeb. Like, this was apparently, yeah.
You can mess with the Jews. You don't mess with the weebs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was repping the weebs, but that was apparently a problem for, the lizards or whatever. So, like, everyone was just saying, oh, this Tinkzorg guy, like, didn't you know that he got fired from his think tank job because he's too much of a weird anime nerd? And it's like, yeah, it's really fascinating where, like, I wonder where these sort of tales actually start or created. But that seems to be a huge thing among the left.
You didn't tell him Makoto was your waifu, did you?
No, dude. My wife is not something as Philistine as that, my friend.
Well, let's so I don't know if you know this, but today's Columbus Day in America. It's considered pretty problematic, and I agree. I was thinking we could change it to someone who's like a more new age progressive figure. What about what do you think of Jen Clyburn?
Oh man, he's a very problematic figure. Probably, like the sole reason that America is not experiencing post-scarcity communist utopia under Bernie Sanders right now. It's him and his fucking reactionary black people, my god.
Yeah, it's like they have politicians that like they expect things from them and they go do stuff for them. It's fucked
Bizarre,
up.
right?
Yeah, it's become sort of a hot button issue among the sort of lost orphans, the dregs of the Bernie coalition that no longer exists. That, like, patronage and this sort of James Clyburn meme image.
Yeah, people be talking about patronage.
Yeah, and to my mind, like, what that sort of image represents is that, Clyburn is an old-style politician. Like, he's doing politics essentially the way it's been done since we stopped being hunter-gatherers.
Yes.
And that was kind of a traumatic experience for me, learning that history had any sort of relevance to the modern day once I started, figuring out this stuff. But essentially, like, there are various, like, social theories that claim that one of the most basic human relationships in existence, apart from, like, being a father and a son and stuff like that, one of the most basic political relationships between human beings is that between a patron and a client.
Yeah, it's basic hierarchy stuff.
Yeah, people always say, no, there's always this gotcha moment where you're just describing politics in, like, its most basic stripped down form. Like, yeah. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, it seems like that would be the way if you're trying to convey information to people, that would be the way to do it.
We live in a very confusing time where there's all kinds of bullshit going on. I like to start at the beginning.
Yeah, and so, according to these theories, essentially, once you strip away all of the noble, glorious causes and ideologies and so on, what you find is relationships between human beings premised on a exchange of protection, services, goods, whatever, swag, and loyalty and fidelity and like serving in your lord's army or whatever, going the other way.
Yeah, you've seen everybody's seen The Godfather, right?
Yeah.
The very start of the movie, there's this guy with this hat in his hand. He's going to The Godfather. He says, but this guy has wronged my daughter or whatever, and I need your help. And the Godfather says, hey, I'll do this for you. And I think people get confused sometimes when we talk about patronage, that we take that to mean that like you're going to get direct cash payments from somebody, or they're going to build a bridge in your district, and that it does work that way sometimes. But on the most basic level, it's someone in power who can do a favor for you in exchange for your fealty.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting things at the end of the day is that like all societies and ideologies during the 19th century or 20th century, like on the socialist left that tried to avoid this, eventually ended up having these systems. And for the Bolsheviks in Russia, the patronage systems were, shall we say, not officially acknowledged, but they still existed in very real ways, because it was, in many ways, especially as the years dragged on, it became more and more lethargic and corrupt. And if you wanted to get a doctor's appointment or whatever, like you had to know the right people, and in like institutional infighting, like you had this sort of social pattern evolving. But like in Sweden, where you never really had like strong revolutionary politics past the like 1917, let's say, the Social Democrats that achieved essentially a one-party state, basically they sort of created this entire society that worked a lot like The Godfather in a lot of ways, and they were pretty adept at it. So the example I usually use is that they had this sort of multi-layered machine politics structure that existed in the US with some modifications, because these people were still socialists, and so they put a lot of value on like reading groups and so on, which you don't really see in the US context.
Oh man.
Sorry.
We just lost 10 subscribers, god damn it.
Oh man. Yeah, well.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I call it as I sees it.
No, this is an L for us. Keep going.
Yeah. So I mean, like, so the Social Democrats, they had all these like, reading groups about how will the perfect communist utopia really look like, when will we get there, and so on. Mm-hmm. I don't really see Tammany Hall doing the same, but I might be wrong. But anyway, like, past all of that ideological stuff, what you find as a state that kind of looks exactly like the Japanese state post US occupation. And like politics was essentially forbidden in Japan after the occupation and during it, because, can't have these racist Japanese become fascist again. So
that's real cultural Marxism, by the way.
Yep, that's.
If you don't believe that something like an outside force could like impose massive cultural change on a country, just go check that out.
Yeah, though I guess you could discuss how deep the change went, but I agree with your point anyway.
We made their deity go on TV and say their religion's over. That was a little much.
Yeah, that is a little much, and yeah. But anyway, let's to avoid getting sidetracked. The point I was going to make is essentially that both in social democrat Sweden and like non-ideological Japan, what you saw was essentially like a corporatist business sector.
Ericsson.
Yeah, you had Ericsson, Husqvarna, Volvo, Saab, like a lot of companies that have like international renown. And they were integrated into the state with like government contracts and so on. And usually, like, you even had these like old money families So in Sweden, the most well-known capitalist family, multi-generational, is the Wallenberg family. And I guess you can think of them as sort of like J.P. Morgan, except even more like a Godfather business. And they have like all these holdings, strategic holdings in the like car manufacturing, weapons manufacturing, all that stuff. And so what would happen in the Godfather state is that the Wallenberg family would make the decision to close down the Saab automobile factory in Trollhättan or whatever, because Saab cars had never ever made a profit. They were always a loss for the company. And then, you know, the workers at the factory would go, oh my gosh, we're going to lose our jobs. And they would complain to their local social democrat, like Gauleiter essentially, who would say, oh my God, I'm not going to get reelected. This is a big problem. So he would call his social democrat buddies up the chain, and this would eventually get filtered up to like the social democrats in Stockholm, in the government. And they would make a call to the Wallenberg family and say, you can't close down this factory. And the head Wallenberg would reply, but I don't make any money. Like, you know, this is how capitalism works. I can't keep operating this factory at a loss. And so the social democrats would think that over, and they would come back and say, well, how about we buy like 20 more fighter planes?
Yeah, now we're talking. You guys,
and then you can keep the factory too, open. Yeah. So we buy 20 more fighter planes, you know, for purposes of national defense. And you keep the car factory open. And, you know, they would haggle, but eventually reach some sort of conclusion, keeping the factory open. And so...
Swedish haggling?
Yeah.
That must be done behind like 16 closed doors. I can't imagine Swedish people letting them see themselves haggle.
Yeah,
that's pretty funny because Sweden was one of the like smaller countries that have they have their own air jet design.
Yeah.
Now I always wondered why that was, because it was graft, in other words.
They probably had a bunch of the best Nazi engineers move there.
Yeah, like it's kind of graft in a way. It was sort of part of a national defense policy against the Russians, but a lot of that stuff was just like the Japanese, who were not social democrats, who were not socialists, who weren't sitting around reading like a bunch of ideologues or whatever, but they still had the same system with their saibatsus for the same reason. And so the two countries are pretty similar in a way, but the fact that like they're so similar, even though their ideologies are literally opposed, kind of shows you something about how politics works. And so if we return to the example of like Bernie face planting, someone like Clyburn probably had some sort of material hand in that, because the Democrat Party still has a black machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be the only real one left.
The biggest thing that is they're not stupid. Those people who support Clyburn, they're not stupid. You're stupid if you don't have someone like Clyburn working for you.
Yeah, and so what's so fucking interesting is that like the most, if you talk to any sort of leftist, and all of these people are, you know, armchair quarterbacks, like revolutionary leaders just waiting for their own company to like march into the machine guns. But all of them will say that someone like Clyburn, as a politician, he just knows how to do, like, run a machine.
He's tricking these blacks.
It's like my mechanic only knows how to fix cars.
Yeah, exactly. Like, in their view, the nuts and bolts of politics, that's not interesting. Like, you want to be the ideas guy. You don't want to be the coder. And the problem with that is just that, like, take the Bernie Sanders campaign. You had almost $250 million going into that fucking thing, like $220 million. And what the Bernie campaign turned out to be was essentially a patronage machine for professionals.
Yes,
Yeah.
they know how to ask for jobs and shit
Yeah,
like
remember when they unionized the campaign?
Yeah.
that. That was a heinous act. That was over the top.
Yeah, like unionizing a political campaign, which is never done, because you're not like the Bernie Sanders campaign did not run on sort of exploiting people because the Bernie campaign controlled the means of production.
Isn't it amazing how quickly any kind of relation to production has just vanished from the left entirely?
Yeah, and we can get to that a bit later down the road, but essentially the Bernie campaign, if you say I'm going to stick it to my employer, what you're saying is you're going to stick it to some nurse working like 10 hours a day or whatever for shit money. That's who you're sticking it to, because that's your employer. That's where the money comes from.
Absolutely. This is the same shit as public employees trying to like. Here's the most bombastic way to put it: Stalin would have done the same thing Reagan did to the air traffic controllers. There you go.
Yeah, and again, it's a huge difference too between like public sector unions and a political campaign union, because in terms of like they're depending on your sort of industrial policy and so on, like there are some things that are owned by the government, like some sectors of the economy. And so those people clearly need some sort of way of making their interests heard, even if that doesn't involve striking. But like there's no way to even tepidly defend a bunch of people saying, oh, well, I'm not going to sort of improve the lives for working people unless I get a market competitive wage.
That's true. And by the way, just on the real, you're going to fly around the United States. If this guy wins, the most powerful man in the world, I mean, roll with me a second, owes you a favor. Yeah. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and so like the sort of patronage character of like all of sort of left politics today is often just openly admitted. So there's this episode interview with Anton Jäger on the Bunga Bunga cast, and by the end Jäger says that, he understands Novara media just, saying that Keir Starmer is evil and then cozying up to him after P1. Because these people, they hoped the Corbyn administration would win so it could give them a job. Mm-hmm. And then, like, the other hosts just go silent, and then they ask, well, isn't that cynical? And Jäger kind of says, well, yeah, it's deeply cynical, but on the other hand, as someone in my position, like in academia or whatever, the labor market is so fucking bad that, why shouldn't politicians essentially do politics so people like me can get employed? And the thing here is that like the issue is not necessarily that sentiment. I think that can be healthy in a way as long as people are completely open about sort of like what the class characteristics of this shit is.
Well, that's where ideology comes in, right? We were talking about this the other day on Twitter, and my view was, if you want to look at it in a optimistic way, you could say, well, ideology is a blueprint for how you want to, what you want to accomplish when you're governing. But the other view you could take is it's just a way to obscure actual politics so that you can have me working to get someone elected for you who's only going to give stuff to you, who's not going to do anything for me.
Yeah, and so I kind of take a dim view of the ability of ideology to really affect politics when like material interests run counter to the narrative. And that's kind of why the left is essentially like not supported by the working class at all.
Of course not.
No.
You have to be an idiot to go along with what they're selling.
You should be afraid of them, by the way.
Hell yeah.
These people, you can find on Twitter these threads of 300 tweets in a row and be like, this guy works at McDonald's. This is what he tweeted. Take him out. You should be scared of them. You should watch what you say around them. They'll fuck you up.
No, it's not. They're not just not just doing that anymore. By the way.
Yeah, and also like there's another reason here to be afraid, and that has to do with people like ordinary people's pocketbook. Like, sure, there's a lot of talk about, eat the fucking rich. Like, when we get to power, we're going to kill all the rich people.
We'll just take all the money from all the most powerful people that there is. We'll just take...
Problem solved.
Yeah, all the most powerful people who know how to avoid that sort of thing, and who I need to point out here, have been deputized as, revolutionary commissars in the war against racist middle America.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos is an ally.
Bezos is the Kulak smasher. He's Lenin 2.0.
So, I mean, like, given how politics works, it's always a lot easier to go after people who don't have a lot of political representation and a lot of power than it is to go after the people who have the most power. And so what will happen once this sort of, like, middle-class left achieves power is that, it won't officially be a program of austerity. It will just be a program of, supporting minorities that ends up essentially redistributing income or resources from the welfare programs that do exist into like new patronage structures for professionals.
Yeah.
And this looting of the welfare systems will be ideologically motivated by the fact that all of these people are fucking racists. We can't pay Medicaid to people who have racist opinions.
Oh, that are they already doing that in the United Kingdom?
Kind of. They can kick you out of the hospital if you're not dying, but if you're racist. So they can deny you treatment. I don't think they can deny you life-saving treatment. But they can you can kick your ass out of the hospital for being naughty.
Most medical care is geriatric care. And when you're fucking 85 years old, you're crazy. You'll just take your dick out. You'll say crazy slurs. You're wild.
Yeah, and also there's a sort of problem here. So where do you draw the line? What is racism? So is, for example, the idea that maybe Sweden shouldn't have the levels of immigration it has had, which, to put it in American numbers, imagine if America had taken about 30 million people in a period of 9 years.
Like 25% of the, like, if I was, think if you're in that, like, the first 10%. If I'm in that first 10%, I would be like, whoa, let's slow down here. Well, whatever. Let's keep rolling.
Yeah, I mean, like in the context of Sweden, like I'm not making this up. To sort of translate it into U.S. population numbers, Sweden has taken in as many refugees as like 30 million people coming to the United States in the span of 10 years.
If you take in like 5 to 10%, you can like be like we can put you on the team. We can bring you up to our life expectancy. Once you take in 25%, it's like, well, we're just going to cordon off areas and just
and so essentially there's problems of like infrastructure. Where are these people supposed to live? So the left has been fighting a rearguard action in Sweden, trying to, for the longest time, deny that there was a redistribution of resources towards immigrants. And they've lost that fight because obviously this has been taken place, and often in ways that the media doesn't like to report on, but in terms of like wait times for dental care and so on, like the wait times in in municipalities with a lot of immigrants, like you can't really get a time at the dentist in folktandvården, so essentially like the state subsidized dental care thing. Like you can't get a time at all if you live in the wrong locale and aren't an immigrant. Like they don't even accept new people. Because immigrants tend to have, like they can jump the queue because dental care in Somalia tends to be quite a lot worse. And so these people have worse teeth. And so
all their qualified dentists are living in Minnesota.
So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so to tie this into what we were discussing earlier, like it's one thing to say, oh, we shouldn't have racists in our hospital, but often there's a huge mission creep here by design, where racism becomes very clearly about politics and not about like prejudice. So
Absolutely.
saying, well, I think we should have halve immigration. Okay, well, that's racist. You should get fired.
Can we ask you about Sweden Democrats? Is that?
Yeah. What do you want to know?
So were you involved with them? I wasn't clear if like you were involved with them, or are you just a supporter, or?
I mean, I got asked. I actually met the one-time deputy party leader Mattias Karlsson during the sort of political fair that Sweden has annually, called Almedalen, which is essentially like a convention where like a bunch of politicians and journalists go. And so we started talking, and then he started up this think tank, essentially, a conservative think tank. And here it is kind of important to point out that the word conservative means something quite different in Sweden. So in the US, a conservative is essentially like a European neoliberal, like
low taxes.
Yeah.
Low taxes.
Yeah, like sure, there's some, like moral majority stuff, but these people don't run the party. Like it's all the right libertarians who make up the policy essentially, and that's not what conservative means in the context of Europe. So the equivalent term in the US world would essentially be like a national conservative or whatever. So people reading Edmund Burke. And so they asked me to whether I wanted to join that think tank, because Sweden is a really small pond. So there's not really a lot of public intellectuals around. And I said, yeah, sure, what the hell? Not because I'm planning to be a part of the Sweden Democrats, and they expel people for talking too warmly of Carl Schmitt, so I couldn't be a member even if I wanted to. But
you could be a communist here, like Carl Schmitt.
Yeah, and I mean, I can be a populist in Sweden, which is what I am essentially. And my political project is not the same as that of the Sweden Democrats, but I have no problem helping them out in some limited fashion, because I see politics in class terms, and I consider one of the biggest enemies today to be this sort of like aggressive professional class, being more and more extreme in sort of carving out more spaces within the state, diverting more state resources, and like creating all of these guild structures and structures of social discipline in order to like defend their position in society, essentially. And I want to crush these people. And so the Sweden Democrats are, they have a lot of problems, like organizationally, but they're kind of notorious for being hated by that entire social base.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a dangerous question, because I needed to ask this to someone
Sure.
in Europe. So in the United States, primarily people who advocate massive immigration, whatever you want to call it. It's a matter of they want to get in as much cheap labor as possible. Now, I've heard people claim that in Europe, and especially like Scandinavian social democracies, that there's also the matter of kind of doing an accounting trick. Do you think it's just a matter of cheap labor or growing the GDP is the goal? It doesn't seem like that's really working out.
Basically, all social security stuff, things like this,
yes,
they all cost a lot for old people. There's not enough young people in Sweden,
right?
And so they bring in young people so that boomers can.
That's
keep
what
the
I was trying to
sheet
say.
going.
Yeah.
That's the theory. I'm not endorsing that theory. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting because it's very clear in the context, especially of Sweden, that like this interest in immigration and making it a token issue, it's not really just about getting Mexican gardeners or whatever. Like that's kind of a small thing, essentially, compared to the US. There's not a massive agricultural sector, and like there's a lot less people who have, nannies and so on in Sweden. So part of that, what you talked about, politicians essentially wanting some sort of accounting trick to keep up the illusion that the current arrangement around pensions and so on are sustainable. That's definitely true. I think there's a lot of like wishful thinking going into this, that like these people would actually save the welfare state long term. Like people said that openly, that this was one of the reasons we had to keep the borders open. There's another reason which I think might sound a bit more conspiratorial, I guess, but I think that it plays into this, which is that the immigrants are not only useful in terms of, you can hire them as a gardener and pay them like shitty wage off the books. Like that does happen. But it's also that this opens up more job positions within the bureaucratic state. Oh. So, especially in this identity politics paradigm, if we accept a lot of immigrants, well, we need, people who represent them, and then people who do not just social workers, like, the state actually, through various channels, like literally pays political activists a living wage.
Yeah, that's not new.
What? How does that work exactly?
That's not new, but
directly,
it's just a commissar.
Yeah, there's a billion different sort of channels, and they exist on all levels, so municipal, regional, and state level. And so you could get hired as an activist just by, applying for like some grant for multicultural immigration, blah, blah, blah. Like there's a lot of money slushing around in various funds. And so I think that
this is a Saudi guy walking around checking to see how high your skirt is and shit.
yeah, like that. Those people, like you have actual sort of, moral police officers patrolling neighborhoods in Sweden, like Somali, Arab, and
white Sharia.
Yeah, no, that really doesn't happen. Apart from like maybe one. Like all of these sort of neo-Nazis in Sweden, or most of them, have formed a colony like out in the sticks. But I think that those people, they sit around playing tic-tac-toe or whatever. They don't really patrol other people. But yeah, essentially, like if you have a huge reception of like constantly taking in more immigrants, you sort of have to have a war-footing economy in a way. Like a mass mobilized economy. And guess who actually profits off of that? Well, people in the professional class who can sort of staff all the various bureaucracies that spring up. So I think there's there was that logic as well.
We should be trying to give them the working class move would be to mandate that they all have to be given sobs.
Be given what?
Sobs. So people like me and Merritt can like fix their carburetors and shit. You know? We need some business coming in.
Yeah, I mean, look, like a lot of left politics these days is very open about the like job creation aspect. They never talk about it that way. They just say we have to create all of these jobs that will be well paying, not because any of us actually want jobs. No. That's just sort of a side effect of social justice.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the social justice benefits of yet another commission doing whatever the fuck is pretty unclear. And until the glorious day where we all eat pie in the sky, it's a living for these people. And so, I mean, so why would you talk about patronage today? This is not so much as some people seem to think about, abandoning revolutionary politics for, politics for its own sake. No, patronage is essentially all that the left is doing for its own, like, historically obsolete class. Like, this is the entire point of left mobilizations, essentially, these days.
Absolutely. I believe if you don't have patronage, you're just not in the game. When we talk about one of these things of whether you do the mass immigration and stuff, this is documented in other cases. I'm not talking about Europe or Sweden or anything. This is the interchangeable thing. So you're interchangeable. That means there's 300 million people in this country. A lot of people say, well, the Republicans, Democrats, they're the same thing. They're in cahoots. Okay, yeah, I know what you mean, but not really. There's a lot.
They're the same for me and you.
Yeah, you're just not Delta 10. I swear to God, I know people who our party line is, we say vote for whoever's going to do more for you. Yeah. I know people that if Republicans get in if Republicans in office, their place of work, it loses funding. A lot of these, that's all patronage network stuff. And for them, hell yeah, you don't. What are you, retarded? Vote for the Democrat then. If you don't have this relationship with anybody, if you just have like promises about like things that are already in the Constitution, then you're not in the game, baby.
Yeah, and so I mean I can share my own experiences because they kind of they're pretty much what you just said, and maybe arrived at from a somewhat different direction. But as I said before we started podcasting, like I'm not part of Bernie world. And I never wanted to be. And so, like, my interest in the goings-on on the left in the US or in Great Britain was never as the sort of person on the outside trying to find, like, a job opening for a political commissar or take-maker position or whatever. Like, I before the 2019, I thought this project were going to fail massively. I underestimated just how massively they would fail, but like I always considered these people enemies. And so my take on this is not informed by any sort of desire to tell the the dregs, the detritus, the driftwood of like Bernie world, oh, you can do this thing to really, like, this is the new way forward for your politics. Like, I don't give a fuck. You all can go die. But my project, and the project of the party, which I've talked about on What's Left and so on, Örebro-partiet, which is essentially like the Örebro party, Örebro being a city in the historical region of Närke. So if you play like Crusader Kings or whatever, Närke is in the middle of Sweden. Anyway, like the lessons from building that party from nothing is essentially that there's a lot of interest in people talking about actually sort of destroying the patronage networks of the professional class. Like,
Nice.
you have all of these systems where, since the 90s, essentially, if you worked at a municipality in the 70s or 80s, like, you were a public servant. Mm-hmm. That was sort of ingrained into you. You were a servant of the people. The resources you were handling, those were the people's resources and so on. But like during the 90s and early 2000s, you had this massive wave of, Tony Blair, like new labor ideology, like new public management, and essentially people started seeing themselves as, I'm like a entrepreneur or a like business leader or whatever. And what that meant for municipalities is that wages shot through the roof, and people in their own sort of self-identification started seeing themselves as, meritocratic stars on the rise and not servants of the people. And so there's a lot of graft going on, essentially, where people just pay themselves really high wages and they give zero fucks as to the wishes of their own constituencies. And also, even on the municipal level, there's this constant sort of pressure towards hiring more fail sons. I'll just give you a specific example so you can sort of get a feel for how ridiculous this can become. So I live in a municipality that's like the 4th or 5th biggest, the municipality of Uppsala. And in the quote-unquote metro area, I think there's like 120,000, something like that. Wow. So it's tiny by American standards.
That's way smaller than I would have imagined.
Yeah, I mean, like the metro area of Stockholm is like 1.6 million or something like that, and that's the biggest city in Scandinavia, so like things here are not very big. But anyway, like this municipality, which is like up there in the top 10 biggest municipalities in Sweden, has like 100 people whose job title is kommunikatör, which literally translated means communicator. Do you know what a communicator does?
No.
Well, officially, they're supposed to do things like handling the social media accounts of the municipality. And, so there's maybe like a Facebook account, probably not a Twitter account, but maybe an Instagram account. So that's 2 accounts, 2 social media accounts that have to be managed. 100 people have this job, or like 98 or something.
Full retirement.
Yeah, they earn like real middle class salaries. Like, if you're a lawyer or something working for the state, that's the salary you're gonna own. Or you can work as a communicator. Like the 2 are more or less equivalent. I think it's like 44,000 Swedish crowns per month, which is a middle-class salary. Anyway, so obviously you can't have 100 people managing a Facebook account. So officially they have like different tasks, like if a school has to send out a note to parents telling their kids to bring like, a raincoat or whatever to the school outing. These communicators are also charged with inserting themselves into the note writing process to make sure that the stationery is color coordinated. Which...
Can you imagine the bureaucratic bullshit that just... It would be better to just pay these people to literally do nothing.
Yeah, but that's kind of what's happening because... like a friend of mine is a high school teacher in the same municipality, and he says that when they have to write a note to the parents, they always try to forget to tell the communicators that they're doing so, because it just cuts out a ton of bullshit, essentially. Like a note to the parents does not have to be fucking color coordinated. But like when he visits the municipal office from time to time, and whenever he comes around, people are just sitting playing World of Warcraft. And to add another layer to this, like they had to hire a consultancy firm. The municipality had to hire like one of the most well-known consultancy firms in Sweden, because to find out what these people were doing on the job. So they have like 100 people that they're paying with like huge sort of workplace issues of bullying and so on, like huge number of people calling in sick and so on, and they call in extremely expensive consultants to
team
ask
of
the basic,
astrophysicists to determine what these guys are doing at work.
And it's like this thing goes on in a lot of municipalities. And so our experience has been that actually, promising a class war against the professionals, that's a pretty good business. Like people want to hear that. And again, you can take those resources. You can probably hire like 130 nurses for those like 98 communicators. And then you can have like one person who handles the Facebook account.
I mean, and that's a really a benign version of it, because in the United States, and I'm sure in everywhere that there's a university, because our university system has invaded the entire planet. But these people, they're not just doing jobs that don't need to be done and wasting time. They are becoming commissars. They're starting to harass normal people now. So it's like, not only are you having these people who are leeching off government money, wasting people's time, they're starting to disrupt the fabric of society. I mean, look at the people who are being arrested at these a lot of these protests in the United States that we're having constantly. A lot of them are like academics. They're just these people who either are employed in these jobs or they want to be, and that's part of the reason why they're protesting. Yeah,
and again, like this sort of social revolution, fight against racism and so on, it's kind of a self-flicking ice cream cone, because you will never ever be done with racism. No. There will always be more microaggressions to discover. There will always be more like inventions lurking at the horizon, like the discovery that straight black people are actually the white people of black people. You can keep doing that forever. And again, like inserting yourself into writing a note to parents for a school outing, like that's kind of benign parasitism. But a lot of the time, this insertion process, this sort of parasitism, comes with a healthy dose of "fuck you, working class people, you are all evil."
Yeah, well, if they can convince people that they need to manage us, like we had to be directly managed, that's gonna make more of the jobs for them. They're gonna give them more power, more social standing. Well, here's a good example, and it's not just academia. That we have that guy who's been churning out the hot takes, that Ibrahim Kendi. You've probably heard of him. He's been raking in six-figure consulting fees from the government. As my friend Bogby said, Jackson cut him a giant check not too long ago. Mm-hmm. So this is a person whose job is to just harass the shit out of normal people. Yeah, and he's going to make bank off of it. That's a big incentive for him to do it more and for more people to join in on the scam.
One of the things that this reminds me of is so there's this. The private sector, like you thinking like, let me cut to the chase. This reminds me of the Saudi royal family, right? And so they have this, there's this thing you hear about Osama bin Laden. They're like, did you know his niece is is a this or that? It's like, yeah, he's got like 300 of them. Because
Yeah.
they had this rule that if you were related to the Saudi royal family, you got the same thing as you get if you're on one of these 10-year things. You get a check guaranteed by a nation state. So whenever you have like this kind of surplus, this free money, permanent, guaranteed by the state. So people were like, well, I can become like a baron just by having shitloads of kids. If I have 30 kids, they all get the check. This happens so much. So this is why Osama bin Laden has like 50 brothers and sisters. They've had this was gonna crash their fucking economy.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a citizen, like a proper citizen, you get a huge stipend by the state, and it's all sort of funded by oil money and slave labor.
We're talking about these PMC guys, right? There's one of these things that I think conservatives will say to them. So like, oh, you're going to get that degree in underwater racism, basket weaving, all this bullshit. Like, all you can do with that is be a professor. And they think that's an own. It's like, no, that's literally like if you don't know why that's the only job they would be interested in, then you need to look up what it's like having tenure. It's really fucking good. Why are there 10,000 people trying to be a rock star? Are they like miscalculating things? Well, kinda. Maybe they'd have a better shot being a mechanic, but being a rock star is really fucking good.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
And the thing here is like, it's really fascinating that PMC has become this sort of for the left in the entire West, that question has become a do not touch sort of question.
Mm-hmm.
And
they should stop being assholes.
Like you're all deeply familiar with like how people sort of respond to that word in the US, where it's like, oh, so you're a real worker then, or like these people are working class or whatever. And what sort of tells me that this is not just about like an intellectual trend or an aversion to Barbara Ehrenreich or whatever, is that like you have the same sort of thing in Sweden. People are trying to be like anti-PMC in Sweden. So that's like a standard position on the left, like being the anti-PMC people. But like nobody uses that term in Sweden. The term that was sort of born, the awful neologism, you could call it, that me and my friend who also runs the party I mentioned earlier, Marcus Allard, we sort of inadvertently popularized a term we ourselves invented, which we call the transferiat. And what we wanted to put a finger on with that term was just that there are people whose main mode of economic reproduction over a significant period of time is state transfers, essentially. Like if you're an activist hired by the state, you aren't being exploited in the Marxist sense.
Right.
In fact, you are living off the exploitation of others. Because again, and this is sort of very telling for the left. For the left today, how do you know that someone is working class? Well, you know it because they have a wage.
They sell their labor to capital, private capital.
Yeah, but the problem with like
these people have a solution for that. I mean, why we're at war is because if you say that, they say, well, people in Madagascar are workers too, by the way. And we think of you and them as we have the same duty to them as we have to you. That's what are we going to do? We have to be at war with them.
Oh, yeah, sure.
We can't do that. We can't do it.
But like actually, like being exploited or being a proletarian in the strict sense, in like Marxist terminology, it's not about selling your labor power at all. It's about selling your labor power within an economic relation where a capitalist, because he controls the means of production, is able to exploit, that is, like, pocket a significant part of what you yourself create.
Right.
So economic exploitation is built into actually producing stuff. So let me take a really ridiculous example to sort of illustrate this. Let's say I find a millionaire or a billionaire like Jeff Bezos, and I convince him to pay me $100,000 a month to sit at home and jerk off to Pornhub, and then maybe write like porn reviews or whatever. So I'm basically a coomer making $100,000 a month.
Good work if you can get it.
Yeah, exactly. It's really good work if you can get it, maybe. But the problem here is, like, Jeff Bezos is not using my jizz to invest in, you know, like, jizz production, so he can, you know, produce more jizz. No, like, Jeff Bezos is relying on the fact that there are people who actually make stuff like, you know, toothpicks and olives and all of that stuff, like, who are actually producing. And then he shifts money from production in order to pay for my, like, cooming habit.
There's a word for that relationship. It's called being a patron.
Yeah, and so the point here is just that, like, even if we abolished capitalism, I would not be able to, you know, coom twice as much. There's physical limits on that kind of stuff.
Oh, we're going on another podcast in a couple weeks, and I'm gonna lay the case out of pro scarcity.
Yeah.
When you're from our corner of the world, like I intend to start like from the beginning, be like, okay, first, because you don't know how far people go when they say there's no scarcity. You have to start and be like, okay, first, do you believe that the heat death of the universe is imminent? Okay, good. Okay, let's go from there. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
You don't know how deep people are, because this is, and you know, there is a system that needs an infinite demand. It's called capitalism. It all falls apart if there's no 3% growth.
Yeah, but like in the sort of mind of modern leftists, like the moment they see a sort of wage relation, I do thing X in exchange for money, they automatically assume that exploitation is going on. And so there's some sort of capitalist who controls the means of production, even when things are not being produced. So like an ideological commissar does not actually produce things in the Marxist sense. And so
we've gotten this in arguments with people a lot, because people say like, oh, you know, capitalism, it started, you know, at the beginning of time. Like, no. There's the frilly Dutch guys with the frilly collars. From capitalism is capital investment. If there's no capital investment, there's no capitalism.
Yeah, and so the problem here is that, like, you know, receiving remuneration for doing something does not actually imply that there's being something that is being taken out. If you give me like $100 or whatever to sort of give you advice, it's not necessarily true that in like post-capitalist society, the advice I am able to give is like twice as much or whatever.
Yeah.
And
answer this for you are a scholar. If there's no capital investment, does that mean quote unquote market logic it disappears?
I would say I'm not really sure about what this question actually means.
Does supply and demand still persist if there was zero capital investment?
I mean, maybe in some sort of definition.
Well,
but,
I mean, of course, it existed before there was capitalism.
It was mercantilism, shit like that.
Yeah, sure. With that, I agree. Like, the abolishing of capitalism is just like abolishing a very particular social relation that is fairly new. And that even in Marx's time, like, it was not actually the norm. It was a thing that was growing. like ultimately, even in post-capitalist society, some people will have to grow the food, and other people who do not grow food or produce something directly, like who do not produce commodities, will do things that are considered socially useful, like, I don't know, being a doctor, or maybe being something that is not even like necessary for the like circulation or reproduction of capital or laborers, but it's just nice. And those people will be remunerated in some way. But like the fact that you do a thing and then get money for it or get like resources for it does not necessarily mean exploitation is going on. And this is a huge problem for the left, because the left today mostly consists of people who actually like they live off not some primary production or even like tertiary production. They live off transfers from productive activity, essentially.
There are people who believe these two things at the same time. Number one, the labor theory of value. So like so things, their value is infused from labor, right?
Yeah.
And they also believe in post-scarcity. That would be if you got rid of capitalism. So think about that. So if you've ever done work in life, you ever moved a couch up heavy stairs, you ever cooked a serious meal that requires a couple of steps. If you would consider yourself of that to be totally free and post scarcity, if there was no capitalism, then by all means. But I have a feeling you won't. I have a feeling you will need some kind of somebody to do something for you to mow your own fucking grass. There's not going to be people driving you fucking Uber Eats and mowing your grass and shit. If things were more egalitarian, if things were more egalitarian, you'd be doing more work.
Yeah, those people would all have that. We've been on this rant before, but that's true. If we had a more egalitarian society, those people would be, cooking their own damn food. They'd be making their own damn bed. They would have to do mowing their own yard, cleaning their own fucking gutters.
Yeah.
And they're never going to. That's the last thing in the world they want to do, and I understand that because hell, if you're minor nobility already, why would you want to get downgraded?
And so what you see historically, and this is still true.
Jerking off the dubbed anime.
Yeah, sure. But anyway, like historically, and this is still true today, the faulty, non-revolutionary sort of demand of the working class is, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. Essentially, I am doing work and I want to be properly compensated and live a decent life while working. While for the left today, the entire demand is essentially that someone will make machines, or maybe we will like expropriate Jeff Bezos and then, take all his underpants and then profit. So nobody will ever have to work anymore, because that's the thing you're escaping from. And so this is why I put no faith in the left and why it's not my project. Because again, if I wanted to appeal to my class comrades, my dear sort of fail sons, I would talk about, abolishing the left and talk about, how we need to have more job creation for ideological commissars. But I'm not interested in that at all. And so if you're interested in actually making sure working people get a larger slice of the pie and don't have to feed a bunch of parasites, you obviously have to adopt a political program that is completely opposite to that of the left. Like, you can't actually try to straddle the difference, because this is what left populism did, and today it's clear that the fail sons have won.
It's almost worse than that too, because I understand the people who, if they think if I support this political project, then I'm going to get a cushy government job or with academia. But as we've seen in the United States in the last few months, there are people who have much lower goals. For example, I mentioned it, or the riots that we're having constantly in like Portland. So a lot of these people are rioting, they're being arrested, they're released without bail, going out. They've been arrested 3, 4, 5, some people have been arrested more times than that. So patronage comes in a lot of forms. There's direct payment. You can work for someone. There's another form of it too, which is simply a district attorney that's friendly to your cause, that won't punish you for breaking the law. I mean, that's a great relationship to have, right? You can go buck wild and be crazy and fuck up your political enemy's stuff. Some people just enjoy the chaos.
Yeah.
And in exchange for your loyalty, your vote, your support of the cause, they're going to let you get away with whatever you want. And there are a lot of people, they're not the majority, but they don't need to be, who that's enough for them, just to be able to just go nuts.
Yeah, I've said this in other contexts, but I think that one of the things that's sort of the logical end point of this, what the Democrats in the US have been doing, which is essentially to accept having, kind of like under the table brown shirts, like muscle. Yeah. Like Shas, for example, where the Democrat mayor just said, "Oh, this is just a summer of love. Like these people, they have good in their hearts. We should be understanding." And then they had to shut it down because
they kept shooting young black people.
Yeah, there was too much murder going on. But like, have people even been charged for killing that like 13, 12-year-old boy? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah,
they fucked around and found out is what the left said on Twitter.
Yeah, and so the problem with this is like this is what you see in like early stages of political dissolution, where like I don't buy the theory that what's happening is that the Republicans and the Democrats are sort of hashing out a new cartel politically, where they sort of divide up the country. I'll fool these people with Roe versus Wade, and you fool these people with like Obama taking the guns. That's not what's going on at all. In those situations, which is the norm for two-party states, like one party does not actually, like both parties have an interest in making sure that there's no fucking extra juridical violence, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone is equally committed to making sure that hooligans can't actually interrupt the democratic process or whatever, because that just messes it up for everyone. So instead, you sort of have this like class war essentially being fought, and one side using, rioters and all of that stuff. And what that is going to end up in, I think, is that, like, sure, you can sort of subsist of middle class rioting, but eventually you're going to have to branch out into like actually trying to engage the lumpen proletariat. And how do you do that in the context of the US? I think what's the best way essentially is to stoke racial animus. And so basically let like black criminal organizations do, what they want in their neighborhoods. Maybe rob a couple of Korean stores or whatever. And sure, we won't prosecute you because like you've been useful to us in the past.
There's a lot of people that they would understand it easier if they went back in time and looked at when there were white ethnic gangs.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that there are just millions of pages written about like, did you know that the Black Panthers gave out meals and was like providing hospital care and performing like government actions like on their own? Did you? And then other time people go, did you know ISIS does this? Did you know? By the way, did you know the Italian mafia does it? They all do this. Why would you do this? Because it's like an alternative government thing. You just moved here from Italy. You don't know how to do your taxes. Why would they do things like that? Because they can tax you. Like that's the whole point why you provide this alternate government thing. Holy shit. Just that one burns my ass up because people just act so stunned. I'm sure the KKK did things like this. This is like a what gang? This is like a. I'm not saying it's good. It's not saying it's bad. Am I saying that the government is basically the biggest gang there is? Yeah. This is all the same business. Don't act like there's some kind of religious Jesus movement out here. Well, these people just want to help people. No. This is not how this shit works. This is like a this works across all time. People, this is like an anthropologically correct thing.
Yeah, and also I think that this is why I really have no interest in trying to save the left, nor do I think that the grander coalition that the socialist left, Jacobins, whatever, are a part of today has any sort of hope. Because, again, in the California model of society, there's not a lot of resources left to sort of fund the patronage networks for the majority. Like, what you see in this sort of dream bugman society is that you have a bunch of Silicon Valley engineers and their bosses, and they make really good money. And then you have their Mexican gardeners or whatever, and their sort of indentured servants on H-1B visas. And then you just have every skilled worker, every teacher, like all of them get fucked in the ass constantly and can't even, afford to buy food or pay for a cup of coffee or pay for rent or whatever in these like hive cities.
I purchased a Persian eunuch when I was at the market last time. Plays the violin, sings well. He's in my marble garden.
Yeah, I mean, that's because you're part of the knowledge workers of the future, my friend. This is.
We need cheaper slaves. That's the big problem.
Yeah, I mean, again, like slave societies tend to be unstable, not just because they're slaves, but because if you look at like Haiti, for example, or the American South, there's not just, whites and slaves. There tends to be two kinds of whites, at least, big whites and small whites. Big whites are the whites that actually are integrated into the slave economy, who pocket the profits. Small whites are everyone else, and they tend to be, like, crushingly poor.
Yeah, they tended to move out west during in the antebellum years because it was the only place you could make a living if you were a small freeholder in the South.
Yeah, and though like conditions are quite different in that like Sweden already has the sort of like state-funded patronage networks for the middle class that people are obviously trying to set up in the US. I think that the sort of winning strategy going forward is quite similar between the two countries. So in my view, what you have to do politically today is essentially commit to fighting and winning this class war that the failed sons have started, smashing all of these patronage networks and defeating their attempts to increase the exploitation of the rest of the country in order to avoid becoming, ordinary working class people. And so
I don't have a problem with these. Every societies need bureaucrats.
Yeah, sure.
You need these people. Number one, I really like Huey Long. Huey Long, he had a thing where a part of his program was that everybody who went to college went for free. This was not a plan where it was 75% of society is going to go to college. This was the people who, if you go take your big test, you're really good at doing the book work. There's no way to I don't care what you guys. The thing is, they'll say, well, okay, so these SAT tests and all this bullshit, this is all racist. Okay, see, the thing is, the model of the test isn't when it's important. The thing is limiting the number. Everyone can't be elite. You guys
it's
can't
scarcity.
Yeah, you guys can't just make all your friends professors. Okay, you have to limit it. So make it doing the long jump. Make it playing Pac-Man. I don't give a fuck. But you guys can't just all be professors. And the ones who are, we'll treat you good. But I don't know if this tenure shit can go on. You can't have this crumbling economy. You don't know what's going up, what's down, and then you just have this one job. The one only job there is. It's like you're just permanently good forever. Okay, you can show up and do anything you want. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, but that's also why, like, you see all of these creations of woke committees and so on, because tenure usually only in reality covers like most sort of classical job related like tenure protects you if you say, oh, I really like Marx, and your professor says, oh, that's communism, I'm gonna fire you. Sure, then you can rely on tenure. But like these new sort of woke ideologies, they cut right through that bullshit. Like if you say, I have some like conceptual issues with the statement that trans women are women, and I'll explain why. Okay, well, you get fired, tenure or not. Like
carpet vomit, no reports. Just,
and so essentially, like tenure is being abolished by the left because, and not by the right. Because this is an impediment to the young generation of strivers. But
this was, by the way, if you're right wing or you're not one of these people, you can't do this. They set this up with like 10, 20 years of HR laws and stuff. This is the reason why this works is because of all this harmful environment and all this bullshit. Like this was cancel culture work was in law before it became like a thing happened to you on Twitter.
Yeah, and again, the right has this ridiculous delusion, like smaller and smaller parts, at least of the American right, because people are sort of learning by experience that this isn't true. But if you look back like 3 years, what was the entire discussion centered around? I don't know, owning the libs with facts and logic on college. And people today realize that no, it's kind of useless to debate these ideas because they're not ideas. Like the ideological layer looks the way it does, not because people fervently believe in it, though a lot of the time they do, but it would look different, or it will change its form in order to just keep firing people, and then in order to maintain this sort of guild structure that is growing. Because like an old style guild during the High Middle Ages did not exist in order to make like the manufacturing of shoes more efficient. That was not the reason. It was to make sure that people who knew how to make shoes lived in comfort, relatively speaking. And so guilds exist in order to control scarcity and create it if necessary, which is kind of different than how a lot of unions operate, because unions in general do not have a constant interest in making sure there's less cars being made, for example. But the point here is just that, sure, people should go to college. I'm not a Luddite, but I think that if you're like the real sort of Luddite, let's stop history in its tracks position today, is actually to say that we should maintain this sort of idea of everyone going to college in a situation where in the US, like, I don't think any of the jobs in the US, like top 10 list of new jobs being created, require a college degree. And so the only way to make like Huey Long's vision of free college somewhat bearable and not just an open invitation for people to become parasites is to make sure that there's not a huge reason to go to college. And the only way to make sure there's not a huge reason to go to college, unless you really like math or engineering or whatever, is to make sure that being a worker who hasn't gone to college is not fucking miserable.
I hate to say this, but if I was advising a little brother, I would tell him to go to college because that's where all the girls are. I'm not kidding. Yeah. Not even kidding. If you've known people who've sort of stayed home after high school, because by the way, this is not a big topic for me anymore. I'm old, but when you're like 19, 20, this is a very, very, very very, very big topic to you. When you're like 19, you know people who stay home. It's
that shit sucks. Yeah.
There's like 3 girls in town, and she gets her pick of the litter. You go off to college, you were nobody back home. You are a stud. Well, as soon as you flip that male female ratio like 60-40, all of a sudden like hey, people taking notice. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. So
that's very important, and it's not really discussed. I wouldn't hope to had it filtered into the data, but it's a thing.
That's definitely a dynamic that's playing out, but it's also sort of coupled with the fact that in every Western country there's more women attaining like higher education attainment.
They're kicking ass at school. They are awesome at school. They're amazing at school.
Yeah,
women are really, really good at school.
And so what you have is an explosion of older women on antidepressants, because it turns out that if you pursue a sort of coupling strategy that relies on your partner being more educated than you, that's a huge problem. It's going to leave a lot of women without a partner in the long run, which is what's happening right now. So
this is freedom, baby. This is you want society with no limits. That you want every woman is trying to shoot for the doctor, the professor, whatever. Less egalitarian society. This is what you get.
I think that the incredibly problematic podcaster Anna Kashian said that, the problem with women is that women almost never know what they want. And, without sort of affirming that, I would just say that as an outside observer, there is a contradiction between we need like women to dominate this and this college program because they're not dominating every college program. And then, I'll only be satisfied with someone who has more educational attainment than me, or at least as much, because the first project is directly undermining the second. But yeah, that's kind of a tangent in a way.
It's useless to try to convince them. There's no law you can write. This is kind of one of these things. It's like breathing and eating food. That you're not gonna debate these people out of it.
We'd just like to apologize to all of our listeners in advance for the subjects.
Freedom is not worth anything if it does not also involve the freedom to make mistakes, and I guess that's kind of what's happening right now.
We're going to lose our sponsorship with Summer's Eve. Keep going. Sorry.
No. I just think that in general, this sort of focus on college, on higher education, like my own experience has been that people who really love the, the Greek classics or whatever, they'll find a way to read the Greek classics. They don't usually need to go to college to do so. And this entire idea that you sort of have to college, as it looks now, is the only way to attain a humanist education. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. And you
It may be the only way to learn like mechanical engineering to a standard that like an entire government would agree upon. Like, I can hire this guy and the building won't fall down.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, there's a lot of sort of hidden assumptions about people's willingness to learn new things and so on baked into the left, of course, because of its class composition. But I actually grew up out in the sticks in Sweden, like 10 kilometers out of Enköping, which is a really sort of, podunk town, or at least it was when I was growing up. It's been growing. But anyway, I grew up on the countryside in a property, like a house that had previously been owned by the Swedish church, but which they had sold, which used to be the residence of, like, the priest attached to the local parish church. And that house has kind of a history to it because, lo and behold, the first agricultural workers union was actually created inside that very house by a priest who became a socialist.
A male priest?
Yeah.
In Sweden?
I know, dude. That was back when Sweden was trad.
Sorry.
I think it's like 70% like
I love women. Sorry,
priests now. But yeah, that's also a problematic tangent. But anyway, like, so this guy, a man by the name of Fredrik Spak, he started this like rural agricultural workers union in that house. And people, like agricultural workers, they would work the fields until sundown, essentially. And then they would walk the mile or so, or like the metric mile here, to his house after work, like a 10, 11-hour workday in some cases, walk to the library he had set up, and read, Marx and Hegel and so on. And these people, back in that day, you had like 5 years primary schooling, something like that. So this was in the early 19th century, so like 1907 or something. So you had working class people, like actual workers, who had a couple of years of school where they, learned how to read the Bible, essentially. And like the people who were illiterate, which weren't really that many at that point because the Swedish school system was good, but there were some people who were functionally illiterate. They went to the library and they had their friends read Marx and Hegel and so on to them. So not being able to read was a barrier to them reading. And when I think about that example, I kind of... parts of me are filled with small niggling doubts as to the complete necessity of having this an insanely bloated higher education system in terms of, without it, the workers will revert to some caveman level. I'm sorry, fuck off. That's not going to happen, first of all. And second of all, the people who will really be stuck up shit creek without a paddle if you sort of do something about this insanely bloated system of higher education will be the fail sons.
Yeah. We can. This is the experiment we're running right now in America and a lot of places in Europe. We have, I think there are double the number of people who homeschool their children this year because of all the schools being bat flu isolated. So not just higher education, some people are reevaluating the way we do primary education, and that's pretty much on the same level. If you've spent any time talking to primary school teachers, at least in the United States, they're not the same kind of people that instructed students in the 80s.
They hate our guts. What should we say? There's nothing. Like, people are like, well, how do you feel about? How am I supposed to? People hate our guts.
They're passionate about social justice.
Yeah, if this is a small percentage, then you guys should hit them with a sock full of quarters at the teachers' union meeting. But they hate our guts, so fuck them. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, essentially, even though both the left and the right wants to deny it, the left because that's like the wolf taking off grandma's clothes. The right because they'll get Marxist cooties if they think about class. So both sides have wanted to deny that there's this huge like new class that we have created through higher education, and they're waging a class war against the rest of the population, like a double-sided class war, essentially. I guess I can mention this. Through various twists and turns I will not go into, I ended up at a dinner with the owner of Paradox. So
Wait, Johan?
Oh, Johan isn't the owner. I think he sold his stocks or whatever. Like,
okay, yeah.
It's another guy. But before, before the release of Crusader Kings 3, there was a huge controversy about the Deus Vult,
Yes,
like whether
remember
that phrase would be in the game, and it turned out it was. But people were making up these theories about, like looking at profile pictures of individual people working, like the union rep in particular at Paradox, who is a guy, he has his pronouns in his bio and loves painting his nails and so on. And people said, okay, this is the social justice warrior that's preventing Deus Vult from being in the game. But the interesting thing here is that for someone who is like, a billionaire capitalist, these unions are not the unions that the Wallenberg family or, the railway barons of the US had to deal with.
Because the labor cartel?
Yeah, like those people just said, like the old unions said, okay, we want a bigger share of productivity increases. Like we want a fair day's pay for a fair day's work.
Right.
But these new unions, like the New York Times Guild and unions like that.
You want to see some anal?
Oh, yeah, sure. I guess maybe. I kind of lost my train of thought here.
He does that a lot. So.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, we can talk about anal in a sec. I just want to finish the point here, which is...
The union will not be denied.
You were saying that these new PMC guilds are different than
because again, what their interest is versus the owner of a game company is not necessarily we just want higher wages. It's actually to make sure that the next Sid Meier guy cannot get hired without guild accreditation. So there's a lot of businesses like that, and that's also where you tend to see these unions, like businesses that usually weren't associated with higher education. Journalism is a perfect example. 50, 60 years ago, like you didn't need a fucking high school education to be a journalist. You didn't need a secondary education. You could have skipped school entirely as long as you knew how to write, or maybe found someone you could dictate to, and you could be a journalist. So a lot of these old names got into journalism essentially by, being runners at a printing house or something like that, brewing coffee for the old grizzled journalists. And then they would get some small column and sort of work their way up. Like the idea that you had to have a sort of high school or post-secondary education, that was ludicrous. Like you
need a big education to tell narratives. You need no education to drive out and write down with your pork pie hat on, write down in shorthand who, what, when, where, why.
Yeah. So at least in the context of Sweden, being a journalist was seen as a working class job. Like a proletarian job in a way. And a lot of social democrats were deeply suspicious of the idea of even having like a higher education for journalism, because they correctly, as it turned out, thought that, well, if we demand every journalist to go to college, like they will become estranged from the working class. Like we will bake in a different class perspective into this whole mess, which we shouldn't do as, a working class party. And that's what ended up happening. But the problem here is that you can still be a journalist, at least in theory, at least if the infrastructure exists. You can still be a journalist without any education or guild accreditation whatsoever. And so you have to have these guilds in order to make sure that this guy who really knows how to walk a beat and write a column, he can't just get hired because he's good at the job, because the guild at New York Times does not approve of him. This Sid Meier wannabe, who may have gotten into, programming or whatever when he was 12 because he liked doing it, you can't hire him. The guild will not be denied. Only people who sort of have the right, not only just like social views, because those social views are not something that just float around in the ether. Like a working class person without any exposure to urban academia has no fucking hope whatsoever of understanding all of the rules of how you're supposed to speak and how you're not supposed to speak, because those rules change constantly, because their entire point is to keep out the rabble. And so for capitalists or owners or whatever in these fields, they're facing sort of unions or guilds whose interest is essentially holding productivity hostage. Like, you can't hire this guy who's really good at making video games, because then our really mediocre people will who have gone to college and come from the right social class and have gone to coding school, they'll be denied a job.
By the way, has anyone ever taken a survey of what coders look like? Like, really? Really? I mean, like, I have... I've heard that, like, there's, like, the only more gendered job is... and not just gendered. We're not talking about, oh, well, it's guys like this and guys like this. There's a certain thing that... it's this concentrating for long hours, sitting at the computer. There's
it attracts a certain type of person.
Certain type of person, and the only job that's more gendered is a military historian.
Damn. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me for some reason. But yeah, sure, you could sort of challenge the male dominance in coding quite easily, I think, if you only sort of lowered the standards, as the saying goes, which is to essentially make it so, and there's a lot of efforts at this in Sweden, so we're going to have this coding...
Put a wig on, get the job.
Yeah, no,
that's the good old boys line.
Yeah, but obviously that can't work, because there's not a lot of people interested in just doing the job. So what happens is you have this sort of coding school, which is 50% coding, 50% yoga. And because yoga, women are really passionate about yoga. And, this example I'm taking, it's not just something I'm pulling out of my ass. There's literally a effort to this effect going on in Sweden, where we will get women to code by giving them free yoga.
This is this is also happening in the universities right now. There's even a racial element in the United States where, like, basically there's half of the university is basically Chinese engineers. I'm being very, very generalization. And then the other half is basically these woke people who right now aren't feeling very useful. And this is why. So the first element we saw is, we used to hear about STEAM. Now they have STEM. Now they have STEAM. So the woke guys got one letter in there. Basically, you need to move your department into the profit department. You need to get on.
What's the A?
Art.
Okay.
But basically, yeah, there's these egghead nerds. They're making all the fucking money for them. They're staying up, doing all the coding, and you need to come up with some reason to be around. The problem happens when they fuck up the production. This is the deal that Hollywood is managing with this, like there was always like feminist shit was always all over Hollywood, but they didn't touch the actual production of the stuff. They didn't say you shouldn't put this in your movie. Once the Harvey Weinstein thing came out, now they're like I think this is probably good because I don't like Hollywood, but now they're like, well, we want editorial control of what's going on in the movie. This is going to ruin the movie.
But again, this is sort of the new situation here, because like, given that almost nobody who sort of employs coders, especially not if it's like a startup entrepreneur or whatever, like someone who doesn't come from old money, someone who is not a middle manager, but who is actually involved in production in any way, like an owner-operator in the classical term. Like owner-operators in the world of programming, they don't care about credentials at all. They care about one thing: do you know how to code? And so if you have a coding school where 30% of the time is spent on yoga, you will have worse coders, because that's not 100% time spent on coding. So how do you solve that? Well, by making, through various means, making sure that the world of, like, the job market of programmers here is divided up along, guild lines. So you can't hire someone who just is a neckbeard and learn to code in their garage, because that's sexist and that's, white, cis, male friendly and blah, blah, blah. So you have to hire these women coders who went to yoga class, because otherwise you're a fascist. The problem with that is not that, these coders are women and this goes against the dictates of a law or whatever. Because these people would hire cats if they knew how to code. The problem is just that you have to make the product, the thing that is being coded, actively much worse in order to accommodate the demands coming from the labor pool. And that is something which I think will, in due course, almost force us into an alliance, a class alliance, which was very common in the early modern era, which is the alliance between the top of society and bottom. So I think that, given that this sort of fail-son, this middle class, these surplus managers are engaged both in a war against the people above them, because again, yoga plus coding is not a good mix, so you have to force that on people, and with people below them, because billionaires are notoriously hard to tax, and this class keeps growing. So the only way to really accommodate the growth is to keep looting the patronage systems, the welfare systems of working class people. Like, these people are just creating too many enemies.
Yeah, if they can't find can't find a way to stay off the golden goose, because if you fuck with these guys, because these guys who are pumping out all this code and shit, they're gonna fail these tests. But if you can't find a way to not fuck with them, that's what's not gonna last. That's what a lot of the dissident right people kind of think they can force happen. Is basically that this isn't gonna work, and if you gave people more and more power, they're gonna get tossed out.
It's kind of our last guess view on things.
Yeah. So again, I'm glad I'm not part of Barney World or part of, like, the working class left, quote unquote, within labor, because these people, they have such an impossible task, trying to keep everyone in the dark about their real class allegiance, and the fact that they're basically like the journeymen and apprentices of Paris in the 1950s. Like, they're a historical artifact. They're totally obsolete. These people, this entire class of people, was created by politicians like Tony Blair, who thought that sending everyone to college was a really good way of dealing with the contradictions thrown up by offshoring, like deindustrializing. Well, everyone will go to college. But it turned out that the work suitable for people who went to college, they never materialized. They never did, and neither the left nor the right denies this. Those jobs never materialized, and looking at the jobs that are growing today, they never will materialize either. So what we have is essentially a class of people with expectations that the animal spirit of capitalism, or whatever the fuck, has no capability of meeting, essentially.
You're describing elite overproduction.
Exactly.
As people.
If you wanted to design a economy in schools to they could do because if everyone's elite, it doesn't make sense. So what you need is the kind of work that just sort of everyone can do for each other, like on each other all the time. So you would want to, like, instead of going to college to be like engineers and stuff, or HR people, you don't need very many of those. What you do need, like, what you could do is have basically like have 75% of the Americans trained to be like masseuses, tarot readers,
OnlyFans.
Yeah, prostitutes, like things. In other words, things that you don't need because you don't. This is stupid. Like the West got super rich. Who knows why? Could be the Industrial Revolution happened at this time, that time. So we got so rich. It's like, well, everybody could. It's like, well, this is the first in our generation to go to college. Yeah, it's everybody. Yeah, we got. Yeah, there's too much. Yeah, we're doing great. We had this great run. We had the 1950s and stuff. It was cool, but it doesn't make sense. And by the way, a lot of these people, if you want to get out and start mouthing off about these people want our jobs, or you're just mad because you're not elite, be prepared. Have your fucking SAT score in your hand, bitch. That's bullshit. By the way, you can't do this both ways. Fuck these people.
Yeah, I mean,
I have no interest in ever being a professor. I don't have a college degree. I don't want to be this. But if you want to start talking out of me, have your fucking SAT score in your hand, bitch.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily dislike these people. Spoiler warning, I really fucking hate them. But even if I didn't hate them on every level, they're fucking dinosaurs. I'm sorry. These people are the Neanderthals of our economies, and it's time they got pushed off into some, some rump strip of land somewhere, and they can, do whatever it is that Neanderthals do until they all die out. But the idea that our society should cater to their whims, no fucking way. I'd much rather try to make sure that, being a non-elite is actually not miserable, rather than trying to save against all sort of economic sense. Like, these people cannot be saved. So fighting to save the privilege of a historically obsolete elite class, like that's just, I'll leave it to these revolutionary pro-worker socialists, I guess, but I'll have no part of it.
Yeah, that was a punchy line to end it on, I think.